here is my excellence, is what you're saying. We never say, here is my mediocrity, pay me. We don't say that. We say, here is my excellence. So if it's not on some level excellent, if I don't see the value in what you have made in that 3 weeks, you have failed.
Hello, and welcome to Keybard. I'm Tembi, bringing you compelling conversations and content about technology, education, and the arts. Today's guest is award-winning actor and playwright Keith Hamilton Cobb, and this conversation was so rich that I had to split it into 2 parts. In part 1, we talk about Keith's training and his early years as an actor. We get into a really nuanced conversation about the commercialization of acting, barriers that Black actors face on stage and screen, and the ideal process for developing story and character in American theater. We also get into his groundbreaking play, American Moor, and the way he developed that piece to interrogate racism, power dynamics, and identity through the lens of a Black actor navigating an industry that prioritizes revenue over the authentic exploration of the nature of human beings. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. We had such a broad conversation that I will not keep you waiting any longer. So stay with me. Up next is part 1 of my conversation with Keith Hamilton Cobb. Keith Hamilton Cobb has been drawn mostly to the stage in his working life, but has also been recognized for several unique character portrayals he's created for television. He's appeared in classical and contemporary roles on regional stages countrywide, most recently appearing as Troy Maxson in the Crossroads Theater Company's production of August Wilson's Fences. He is a graduate of New York University's Tisch School of the Arts with a BFA in acting. His award-winning play, American Moor, published by Methuen Drama, ran off-Broadway at Cherry Lane Theater in the fall of 2019. It is the recipient of an Elliot Norton Award, an Adelco Award, 2 Ernie Awards, a 2022 Cleveland Critics Circle Award, and is part of the permanent collection of the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. Keith is the director of Project Untitled, a company evolving socially just processes of analysis and inquiry at the intersection of humanities education and theater making, and of the Untitled Othello Project, currently in residence at Sacred Heart University, which operates as an extended interrogation and rehearsal with artists and educators of Shakespeare's play Othello, disrupting antiquated ideas of its purpose and value. In addition to his work as director and administrator, Keith speaks at academic institutions around the country on the topic of the intersection of race and Shakespeare, particularly as it's reflected in American Moor and in the Untitled Othello Project. His most recent engagements have been keynote speaker at the 2023 Blackfriars Conference at the American Shakespeare Center, the Arts Transcending Borders residency at College of the Holy Cross 2023, the 2022-23 Hearst Artist in Residence at Weber State University, and Artist in Residence 2021 to 2023 at Sacred Heart University. To learn more about Keith and his work, visit AmericanMoor.com, that's AmericanMoor.com, UntitledOthello.com, or KeithHamiltonCobb.com. Welcome, Mr. Keith Hamilton Cobb.
Thank you.
How are you?
Well, Demby, thank you for doing this with me, having me here. Happy to be here. Happy to be talking to you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm so excited to get started. I want to just start at the very beginning of your journey. I want to know what first drew you to the craft of acting.
Funny, I've always had a difficult time with that term, craft of acting.
Why? Okay. Well, before you answer, then why? Why do you have a difficult time with that term?
We used to hear it a lot in acting school, acting training in the United States but always been a dubious endeavor. I mean, it's for money, right? So anywhere you go, somebody will hold out their hand and say, "You pay me, and I'll teach you how to be an actor." And I don't know how much you can learn how to be an actor. All sorts of techniques have been applied since forever. You do it this way. You do it. It's like making the perfect martini. No matter where you go in the world, somebody will show up and tell you how to make it right. And it is an industry, like so much that we do in this late stage capitalist country. Everything that we do, it drives everything, right? How do we monetize thing? And so craft is a term that's useful in that vein. I'm going to teach you a craft, and for that you will pay me. I'm going to teach you how to do this. And there are craftsmen, actors, and there are journeyman actors. The difference between a craftsman and a journeyman, if you look at a wooden box that a craftsman has made, you see all sorts of jointing and inlay, and it's exquisite and beautiful and perfect because a craftsman has studied to build that thing. You say to a journeyman, I need a wooden box, and he'll get some wood and some stuff and put something together that is extremely functional. It just is not, it's not exquisite. It's not perfect in the same way.
What are the differences between those two?
The difference is that a craftsman has actually studied the craft of making things perfect. And there's any number of cultures in the world that harbor the adage that nothing has any right being perfect. Nothing is perfect, right? You make things unperfect. You create a perfect thing, and then you do something to screw it up so it's intentionally not perfect. I digress.
No, but does that then make acting not able to be a craft because of its nature, the nature of craftsmanship?
It doesn't. But what happens is you are able to spot craftsmen, somebody who puts together the perfect performance. You can spot them doing the work. You can spot them applying their technique. You can spot them doing all sorts of things that is not being human. Humans are imperfect. Humans, there's a level of rawness to performances of people that are authentic because we are raw. We are not perfect. You cannot apply technique to the degree that it makes something. That the craftsman will always turn in a very polished performance, but the question remains as to whether or not that thing that it is presenting, he is presenting, she is presenting, is a fair or accurate or authentic representation of a human being.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this then, because I like this digression. So then, are we specifically then speaking on realism in acting? Because what about a more stylized genre of theater?
Sure.
Could we then apply craft to that?
You make a great point, and I think the answer is yes, that you can. For me, I'm interested in people. Stylized theater doesn't excite me. Very often in stylized theater, you're busy seeing style. You're busy seeing people doing stuff that they were taught. That you take a play, I was down in Actors Theater of Louisville when I was still a young actor, and Bogart's City Company was down there, invited to do a production that she directed there on the premises of who wrote Picnic? Was it William Inge? I believe it was Inge, and that's a realist play about a picnic from 1940s, 50s, somewhere in there. I don't know.
1953 is when it was published, but I haven't read it, so I don't know if it was set in 1953.
I'm sure it was thereabouts.
Okay.
It's about people gathering for a picnic and the human interactions that happen at that picnic. And it was these people doing City Company stuff, right? They took the text and did City Company stuff for an hour and a half. And all you can see, you're not looking at the play, you're not looking at people, you're looking at people doing strange, strenuous, extraneous movements and jumping up and down and making faces and speaking loudly and acrobatic, lots of technique, right? Lots of quote unquote craft that they have perfected,
Yeah.
I didn't see any human beings, except the human beings that were making the play, right? I saw the people being people, but they weren't the people they were portraying. They were actors. They were
Okay, so really you're interested in humans. This isn't even about acting for you. This is I'm going to ask you this. Is it an exploration of humanity through theater, film, television, whatever the medium happens to be? Is it really about understanding the human condition, understanding humanity?
Well, it certainly ought to be. If you ask me, I don't know what else is going to save us, because it is certainly that condition that has brought us to this place. And unless that condition changes, it's going to continue to bring us where it brings us. So unless we're looking hard at how we behave, Shakespeare in Hamlet's speech says, holding the mirror up to nature, but nobody does it. Well, I saw
Mm.
I saw a production of Hamlet recently where a young woman, and in her defense, she was quite young, was playing Hamlet, and she gets to that point in the play where she's talking to the visiting players about how to act, and this is Shakespeare saying, there's ways to do this well, to be human beings and to show other human beings, which is your audience, what they look like. Hold the mirror up to nature, and don't overspeak, don't over articulate, don't under articulate, don't gesture too much. And she was busy doing all the things in her speech
That she was
that Hamlet, had throughout her performance.
don't do.
She was
Yeah.
just huge and all, big and indicating, and I thought, I don't blame her. She's a young actor. She's learning. But there was a director looking at that, right? There was a director looking at that. Didn't you tell her to behave? Didn't you tell her?
Well,
Didn't you?
wait a second. Now you direct, you know that you in the rehearsal room, you can give somebody a note a million times, and then when that show goes up, if they're young and inexperienced, they can go right back to whatever that muscle memory is that they've been practicing on. I'm not saying that, I'm sensitive as a director. I'm just saying sometimes people, I mean, maybe then the argument is, well, maybe she wasn't the right person for the role, right?
That's one argument.
But you know what I
I do
mean?
know.
Going back to this sort of
I do know exactly what you mean, and that
Mhm.
one argument that you make is cogent. There is also the argument that if you have given yourself 3 weeks to put up a production, you have no time to work with her, right? And so it is incumbent
Yeah.
upon you to find yourself the time. If you're working with young actors, then you better find yourself the time, especially if you're presenting it to a public and charging them money for it, right? Right.
That's
Here's
real.
here
That's
is my
real.
excellence, is what you're saying. Don't you never say, here is my mediocrity, pay me, right?
Oh gosh.
Right. We don't say
Yeah.
that. We say, here is my excellence. So if it's not on some level excellent, if I don't see the value in what you have made in that 3 weeks, you have failed. And there's no real value. I mean, I can see the training value. I'm not blaming the actor, right? I'm
Mhm.
blaming the structure around that actor for not nurturing and supporting, in a way that would allow them to bring their best and to grow. And I think getting back to our actor training, you are
Yeah.
selling that, right? You are saying, come here for 3 years and we will send you out into the world ready to be an actor. And of course, unlike being a doctor or a lawyer, there are no venues of support once you leave school. There's no place to go out and be that immediately and grow into that. You can go to graduate school if you have the money, if you are supported in that way or privileged in that way, or you can stand in line to be, in the next Harry Potter on Broadway or so whatever regional. You can go start to do that thing, and you've been taught that that's what you're supposed to do as an actor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's insidious, and it's reprehensible. It's a terrible model to make anything creative that is truly of value. So there.
So, um
Uh, uh,
well, wait. You didn't find this out though until you were already in the field. You didn't learn these unfortunate truths until you were in the field. So something early on, something sparked you and told you that this is what you needed to do.
well, to a degree, that's true. Your initial question was, how did you come to the craft of acting? And we got hung up on craft. When I was coming up through high school and junior high school, I think I was too perhaps shy, but perhaps more correctly, not particularly social, a child, a young person, to engage in the sorts of ways that theater is presented to us as a extracurricular activity. I was not one to show up for high school drama club or anything like that. I was busy drinking beer and getting stoned. I mean, that's what you do in high school. I mean, very
Okay.
honestly,
I mean, yeah, that's true.
and enjoying the handful of friends that I thought understood me. And so um, I always liked it. I always appreciated it. And in fact, the first truly inspiring work that I saw, something that stayed in my mind, that and left me thinking, I want to explore that as I find a place to do that as life goes on, was a high school production of Arthur Miller's The Crucible with high school actors, which, if in retrospect, if I think about it now, probably wasn't all that well acted. It was a high school production, but the play, hearing it for the first time, was stunning to me. The language, what the play was about. There was a young man playing John Proctor and a young woman playing his wife, Elizabeth Proctor, who I thought dynamically on stage were quite good. And I was struck by I was struck by how that struck me. I was struck by how that made me feel. And I've always remembered that. I said, yeah, I want to do that. That's real. That's important. This story is real. These human beings, how they interacted, how they behaved, what they caused to make happen. It's very memorable to me. So when I left high school, I was at a community college for a couple of years, kind of off and on for 2 years, never following a curriculum per se, but if I was following one at all, it was an English curriculum. And consequently looking at classical texts, Shakespeare, and realized at some point that it was to be performed. It wasn't intended to be read. And luckily stumbled upon some performances that were quite good. Most are not. Most are, Shakespeare eludes us so much in this country, and that's a separate discussion. But if you see people who truly act it well, which is to say, spend their time understanding, embodying, and presenting the human being and not the language. Right? Yes, the language is there. Yes, the language there has to be some skill and ability to get one's articulators and brain around how the language works and how it serves the presentation of the human being. But at the end of the day, for us, for contemporary audiences, these are people. These need to be people that we recognize. And when you see that, when I saw that, it was again striking. It was another sort of milestone moment. I was like, oh, I want to do this. So I went to NYU. I applied to the undergraduate program. And again, I got to be honest, I was a lazy, just out of high school kid. I mean, I'd been a couple of years out of high school, but I was still lazy and was more interested in smoking reefer than doing anything else. I applied to one college because I was lazy, and I went and they accepted me.
And that one college was
Right.
Tisch.
Yeah, right. And if I
and you
that's
got in.
that's right. But the thing is, had they not accepted me, I might have been something else because I wasn't going to apply anymore. I just wasn't. I was late. I didn't. I only applied to the one. I wouldn't apply to any other. Right. I wasn't. Most people apply to like 5. I was like, well, I'll do this. I'll do this one. And lo and behold, and so off I went. But
what did you audition with? Do you remember? You probably don't.
I don't.
Maybe.
I really don't. I don't. I think they wanted 2 pieces. Maybe they just wanted one.
Probably 2 contrasting pieces.
Yeah.
Because you don't sing, right? So you didn't sing.
I didn't sing. No. It was probably something typical like Walter Lee, which,
that's what I was going to ask.
Something,
like, did you?
Yeah. Something something typical, but and this was 84, right? And NYU Tisch had been named to like the list of top 5 or top 7 drama schools in the country or something like that very recently. And so they were busy with this expansion. What happens when schools are named to lists like that is that's the worst thing that can happen to them, because then all of their effort, all of their focus turns from what they were doing to achieve that to a focus on maintaining it.
Mm.
Right? They all get nervous and up in themselves, and everything shifts. Right? So they were doing all of this transition, and it was about bringing in name artists to work with students who would come. Again, it was product based, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I understood that. I understood that at a young age. I mean, couple with the fact that I was hard headed and didn't want to follow curriculum, didn't want to do things the way anybody told me to do it. You know, I was also aware. I was also very aware of human beings manipulating. You know, I was taught by a lot of acting teachers at YU who were, you know, hadn't made it as performers. They were doing the thing that Americans do who call themselves theater professionals, right? Which is everything but make theater, right? Right?
Yeah.
Here in this
Yeah.
country,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
You know,
In this country.
you can
Yes.
call it a vocation, but only a handful of people get to treat it as one. For
Mm-hmm.
the rest, it's an avocation, right? Because you're busy doing all kinds of stuff to make money, and one of those things is teaching other students how to do what you do, which is not a really good plan, because
Not the
what you
thing.
do, you're perpetuating a way of thinking, a mindset, and a way of a mode of behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
That never transcends, you know, well, you can always teach, right? I'm going to give you these things and you go out there and you can always teach. I will offer my what I believe, I tend to understand in my experience to anyone who steps up and asks me, but I will never hang out a shingle that says, you know, listen to me and pay me money, right? And I will teach you how to be an actor. I think it's nonsense. I wanted to act. I wanted to do that, right? And I wanted to learn how to do that. And for all I knew, that was a place to do it, right? And so I went ahead. I don't know that it served me very well. I mean, I think the things I take away from my NYU actor training, I can count on three fingers of one hand. You know, what are you doing on stage? What are you doing on stage? What are you pursuing? What do you want in this scene? You start
Yeah.
there.
But do you feel like then that more of what the experience at NYU did for you was it was more about professional positioning than it was about the actual process of being an actor in the moment? You know, I could look at your resume and see, oh, okay, you studied acting at Tisch. So you're hired versus nothing
Yeah, it
there.
never worked out that way.
Oh.
It never really worked out that way for me. You know, I don't know that I gained a lot from the Tisch moniker on my resume. First of all, because it was undergraduate.
Fair enough.
I didn't graduate from a conservatory. You know, I see it happen more often at Yale, right?
As far as undergraduates being able to.
No
Oh,
graduates
okay.
than at Tisch. You know, Tisch may have, you know, Tisch graduate program may have its own little mafia as these schools do, but I was never a part of it. And part of that was, again, my personality. You know, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 years out of school, I would go to drama bookstore and I would look at plays that came along while I was in school and just getting out of school. And I'd look, you know, if you look at Samuel French or Dramatist Play Service play, you open it up and you'll see the first production in New York was so and so. They'll have a little thing there, and I'd see names of students, you know, that I went to school with, and I thought, yeah, they were in the mix. They were in conversation and interaction with these people doing the work. I went home. I left the city. I rode home to Westchester. And got on with my other aspects of my life. I loved theater. I just wanted to act, but I didn't know how to be at the party in the mix where I needed to be. You know, so I was never part of that. I never, you know, developed that sort of a network, which I guess you could argue was detrimental. You know, ultimately to a fruitful career. But yeah, so I mean, I think that answers the question of, you know, what nothing drew me to being an actor. I was in, I just, and I don't know that that anybody is drawn to being any kind of an artist. It's just
Hmm.
what they are, you
Oh,
know.
okay.
It's just what they are, you know, and And I was this thing in whatever form as I was coming along. And then there are these moments that you see that inspire you, like the production of Crucible, right? Or the Shakespeare productions that are like particularly striking. And along the way, more and more you say, I'm why am I sparked by that? I want to try that. I want to do that. And the one thing I came out of NYU with was an attraction to the poetry of Shakespeare, right? And a sense that there was work for me in that. There was something that I could do in that. And of course I was, looking back on that, I mean, there was a whole lot of training that still had to happen, but the training comes from living it and doing it. It doesn't come from sitting in rooms with teachers. It doesn't, as far as I'm concerned. I just wanted to go out and do it, and I apprenticed at what was then called the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival before it became Bonnie Monty's thing, which is now called what is it, Shakespeare Theater of New Jersey or something like that. They changed the name. And that was a dying Shakespeare festival that the artistic director had sort of run into the ground. And I was the apprentice program was one where young people were hired out of school to do everything that they didn't want to pay anybody for. Right?
Yeah.
And you got a hard look at the state of American regional theater. And I thought, well, this is horrid. There's not a lot of integrity in this. There's not a lot of art in this. It's sort of mediocrity in a large part. And I was very disillusioned, and I left for a year or so after that, didn't do anything, and then slowly came back to it because it was in me. Creating was in me. And I worked at a community college, building theater and designing light plots and hanging lights and directing some things and doing a little bit of acting, and slowly eased back into the industry. And once I left that and was back in New York just as an actor with an agent and a pack on my back, I was again sort of looking at an industry that looked at me in certain ways and wanted certain things from me, expected certain things from me, expected me to show up as a certain kind of thing. It's all in the play. It's all sort of in American Moor. It traces that trajectory in a way. Still growing into manhood, right, and forming a man's perception, not just of himself, but of himself in a world around him that sees and treats him in a particular way that he can now identify and understand. When these things are happening for the first time, no one understands. You develop this sense of yourself in America over time. You see, things are repeated. You see how people are approaching you. You see what they say to you. You hear, you feel. You see what roles you get. You see what roles you don't. You see how people respond to you walking into rooms.
Can I say something about that?
Of course.
Yeah, you talk about what roles you get, right? I want to. So you've done television and theater during the course of your career, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about the kind of roles that you get. Now, I want to know how that people perceive you. You're yourself moving through the world as an artist, but people perceive you a certain way based on a number of things about you physically, including how you look. And do you feel like how you look was a hindrance to what you really were trying to uncover in the work? Because I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do you feel like people just focus more on your looks than on what these burning questions and ideas that you had inside you?
Well, yes. The short answer is yes. There's probably some nuance to it if you want to unpack it.
I'm leaving it to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
because that's another layer.
It is another layer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a very layered layer.
Yes. Yes, it can, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Because certainly I can imagine there are times where you felt like, okay, I'm a really good looking guy, And I can get a sense that that's helping me in some cases. So certainly you can be like, all right, because this is helping me, I'm trying to get to some, maybe it's a means to an end in some cases. And then in others, I can imagine it's an obstruction because you're trying to get people to look past that and into this investigation, specifically with regards to American Moor, about the experiences of Black men through that lens of Othello.
Yeah. This is so deep. I mean, one knows not where to begin, really, with a question like that. I mean, we when I talk about Shakespeare performance in the United States, I talk about the spectacle of it, and I say Americans have been taught to see better than they hear. Uh, Elizabethans went to a play to hear it. That's why the poetry exists. They heard the play. Many of them were sitting too far away. There was no amplification, So you would listen, and we've lost that ability. So much of what the language, even if it's delivered well, is meant to give us is missed. We see. We need spectacle. Right now, that's a bit tangential, but I say that to suggest that all of us are seeing one another all the time. We're seeing, that is the first impression that we get of anybody before we hear them. So on the matter of race, there's no hiding. I mean, Americans see Black people, and they'll tell you, I don't see color.
Right.
And of course that's bullshit.
Yes,
and that's a separate discussion. But the fact remains that precedes you. That is what people know about you immediately.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they also, when they're trying to put that in a frame that, again, you have to remember, is about marketability. How am I selling this? Who am I selling it to? How do I make money on this? Right? That Black that they see goes certain places, has always gone certain places, certain audiences, right? Certain portrayals, right? This is going to be a certain type of character.
Mm-hmm.
She is going to be used in a certain way. This isn't going to be the lead. This is going to be the best friend. This is going to be the,
Yep.
the funny chuckle-headed,
sidekick.
Sidekick,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's going to be the criminal.
Yeah.
Right. And that's has its evolutions, but it is still very much the same thing when you break it down and look hard at it. We haven't left that behind. So there's that, right? And that is forever. And again, one gets used to knowing how other people perceive them, knowing this person sees that I'm this Black person and is synthesizing everything they know in terms of how to act and react to me through that lens, even if inadvertently they are behaving in a certain way because I am this thing.
Yes.
Right. So I come along, and at first I'm naive. I'm walking out into the industry, auditioning for roles and guest stars in shows. What was going on at the time? There was all the Black urban dramas were coming along that made careers for guys like Omar Epps
Mm-hmm.
and cats like that. And I was thinking, well, they just want me to be me. I had no sense that I needed to be like them to get the job.
To get a role. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was just acting. I just look at the material and say, well, this is the way I would act that. And I had no sense that people looking at that saying, oh no, this makes no sense. Right. Well, I guess it depends on the angle from which you look at it. I mean, it makes a certain sense, right? This is a guy trying to portray a human being, right? What level of creative intelligence is anyone lending to this work? Or are we just trying to sell things, right? Knowing they fit in a frame, and as long as we keep things in that frame, we will be able to make money at this. So that happened for a while, and I was getting older and growing into my particular physiology. My hair was growing. Why was my hair growing? Well, I came out of school with it growing, realizing I liked the look and didn't want to go through life looking like everybody else. I thought it was beautiful. It didn't occur to me that wasn't marketable at the time. Or if it was marketable in a frame, right?
Yes.
Who was looking like that? Well, Cosby Cosby kids were looking like that in a different world, right?
Yes.
And things, right? People selling product. If you were selling Fritos to black kids, you could look like that, right? Right. If you're selling McDonald's,
Yeah.
if you're selling McDonald's to black kids, you could look like that.
Yeah.
That's somebody you'd see at McDonald's buying a burger, happy about it, with his hair, sticking out, but it wasn't a black leading man, which is what I was turning into, which I was reaching the level of maturity to be. And so people would say, well, you can't.
People said you need to cut your hair. They were like, if you cut your hair,
you got to cut that. You got to cut that hair.
Talk to you.
And I was learning, but I hadn't reached the place where I thought that was necessarily correct. I mean, my naivete caused a lot of problems, in my development, but it wasn't, it was quite authentic. And, to a certain extent, I maintain it.
I think so.
I started auditioning for daytime, right? And my hair was long, right? It reached a length. It was down my back, and I was tall and strong and handsome.
Yep.
And I think what happened, I mean, I've said this before, what happened is that hair growing past a certain length went from ethnic to exotic, right? So I became this powerful brown striking presence that in daytime you could now have these interesting relationships with non-black women that they were selling, right? Again,
what's marketable?
Marketing. And they were very careful about it, right? Because it wasn't the couple that were the power couple now, Kelly Ripa and Mark Consuelos, right? Who are also on the show, right? He was supposed to be Latino, but they were ostensibly white people. And they could have this sort of very down and dirty love scenes on pool tables and things like that, right? That was supposed to be very titillating. I had a girlfriend, in Sydney Penny from the same family as Mark Consuelos, right? They're supposed to be Latino, right? But they read as, you call them Latino, but they read it, they're
European white person.
Right,
yeah.
right, white people, right? So they're the same Latino family, right? And she's my girlfriend, but any kind of sexual contact that we had was very staid and very nice and sweet and couldn't be at all lustful, or because you're dealing with this issue of he may be exotic, but he's still this large, for all intents and purposes, what we see, dangerous, I don't even know if I have to talk about it. It's, this whole,
right.
So you come along and you watch that, right? You are experiencing it, but you're also standing outside of it, looking at it, right? Looking at how people treat you as opposed to somebody else, right? You can do this, but you definitely cannot do this, right? You can go here, but you definitely cannot go here. And this continues to build a perception of you for yourself vis-a-vis the world that becomes your life and your understanding of your own life, right? And ultimately how you deal with others, who come to the table to engage with you. I don't know how we got there or where we were.
We were talking about, you were talking about the way that you were coming to an understanding of yourself. So you started where you ended. You ended where you started, right? Television and on stage. And you were talking about sort of that journey of understanding who you are and how you were, quote unquote, marketed, and how you saw people reacting to that and how that shaped you. I wanted to ask you about how you developed characters between those two different mediums, but because I'm curious, even within these questions, right? They're sort of the typical questions I would ask an actor, but you have such a unique experience with it because you are somebody who, even when you came to understand, oh, okay, these are the rules of the game. If I play these particular rules, if I do this thing, then I will get this consequence. I'm not going to say reward, but this consequence is likely. You still didn't do it. You were like, I don't care. Do what I want. Most people don't do that. Most people are like, all right, they want me to cut my hair. I'm going to cut my hair. Okay. They want me to lose weight or gain weight. or they want me to only audition for these types of roles. They want me to only see. Most people will just go with it because what they want ultimately is what is considered commercial success, what's considered sort of the popular success, as opposed to what we started this conversation with, which was people understanding humanity and holding up the mirror, like you said. And it seems like those two things can't happen in the same space. So I was just curious, even though you were operating in that space, how did you manage the work?
Well, managing the work and establishing tools for yourself to do the work, to create character, is part of the same equation, right? What are you allowed to do? Which directions are you allowed to go? You have to remember that I always just wanted to act. My goal was not to sit on a daytime TV show for 25 years and have a lovely life, lovely life being, one that's always supported and money abounds and much less to worry about. I would have liked that. I would have liked to have that kind of support, but I still wouldn't have wanted to sit doing the same quasi-creative thing for years and years. As any kind of an artist, I wanted change. I wanted it to be different. I grew bored with things, especially if they were formulaic. And much of the TV that I got to do was formulaic, whether it be sci-fi TV or daytime TV. It was the same thing again and again. And once you've established the tools to do that, you could apply that like any other factory job. As far as creating character, what will producers indulge? What can you convince them that is indulgence worthy when their equation is what can we sell? So if you take a role like Noah Kiefer on a daytime show, and God, this was so long ago, and I was so new and so happy to have a job, and be making real money. The regional theater had not been good to me, again, because how I was the big striking person that audiences looked at, but yet I didn't have the name to be a lead, right? I wasn't the person you hired for a lead. So you can't hire me as number 2 or number 3 because you're supposed to be looking at this guy who's the lead. So I didn't work. I didn't work enough. And when I got a daytime show, I thought, well, this is lovely. At least I have money and I can do something new. And of course, the newness fades very quickly, and you have fun. You spend the money, and you go to work every day, and that's nice for a while. But, if you have other things on your mind, if you have other creative aspirations on your mind, it's a hard place to sit around. But the upside is that over the course of a couple of years, that character starts to take on characteristics that you've instilled in it. From my perspective, you start with the basic idea. Who is this character to the writers, to the producers? Well, Noah Kiefer is this guy from the other side of the tracks, who's basically a criminal who meets and falls in love with a person from the right side of the tracks, right? And they have this wonderful romance that everybody's going to appreciate, and he begins to find his goodness and his love, and we begin to root for him and say, okay, she changes him, and makes him respectable, acceptable. All right. Well, there's all sorts of things wrong with that idea, right?
Yeah.
And the tendency for somebody as naive as me, but still deeply interested in acting is, all right, so I'm from the wrong side of the tracks. What does that mean? I'm poor. I'm a criminal. I steal things. How much of a criminal? What do I know? What do I know how to do? How many illegal ways do I know that I can ply to make money and means and survive? And what do they look like? When do I start to lose them? Which ones do I keep? Right? Because good criminals are smart. Good criminals have to be smart to keep from getting caught. Yeah. It's only the bad criminals that get caught. Right. How do I dress? Well, originally, it was baggy clothes and big sneakers and gold chains. And I thought, no, I don't. Said, I've never been that much of a criminal, but what I know about my any level of criminality in me is that I'd tie my sneakers so I could run fast, right? Yeah. I'd tie my sneakers. Thank you. I would probably not have lots of stuff hanging off me that gets stuck on shit as I climb fences or jump through windows. Mm-hmm.
Probably don't want
I
to call
probably
too
would
much
be,
attention to yourself, right? Be
that
too
that's
flashy.
that's right. I don't exactly. Don't talk too much,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
You listen and you look, right? You observe, right? You walk into a house, you're looking at stuff, right? Do they lock these windows?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm. So
uh,
that's your process. That's how you're building character
right?
in such
So
a
yeah, so this
space.
is absolutely this is process and holding on to, give me the backstory, give me the parameters. Who do you have? Who raised him? Who are these people? What did they teach him? What did he eat? Who still exists in his sphere? What was the vernacular? What language did they speak? So Noah would come out with sort of odd vernacular that wasn't in the script that became, the writers would come and say, well, I didn't write that. And I'd say, well, can we keep it? Because it really is kind of what this person might say. And these became little things that the fans really enjoyed about him, right?
Hmm.
His language seemed at times out of left field, but genuine, right? It was colloquialism. It
Mm-hmm.
came from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
This is human. This is the humanity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Of these characters that they appreciated. So over the course of 3 years, Denby, you can build that at the same time, sort of growing bored with the fact that this isn't going anywhere in a plot-driven device,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a character-driven device, right?
Yeah.
Anytime they shift the plot, they're going to take all this stuff that you built and throw it out the window because they need your character to go in this direction. And you're stuck saying, well, this character would never do that. So yeah, but we're going to do that because we're paying you, and that's where we're going with the story, you know. And that happened. That happened several times on both the daytime shows that I did, and was always difficult. And any practical journeyman would say, well, I'm getting paid. I'm getting paid. I'm going to do this. I'm getting to live my. That's what they want. These and they're absolutely right. They're absolutely right. All I can say is I'm a human being with an evolved belief system, with needs and desires and dreams and ideas about his value, right? That he has invested in, right? And I think so much of our culture does not nurture our children to do that, to be that, you know, this is about survival for
Yes.
most of the country. It's about just how do I don't care.
Yeah.
I'll get a call from, the what do you call it in Easy Pass, right?
Yeah.
Easy Pass that you put in, so you have a problem, you went through a toll and maybe it didn't read it or something. So you find yourself on the phone with people at Easy Pass and you think, I'm talking to somebody who's sitting at a desk talking to people about Easy Pass problems. They probably got their big gulp soda sitting there, and they are part of a bureaucracy that is meant to standardize and make money, right? And they have a job, right? And then they go home and what do they do, right? How much of the world, how much of our culture is built of people doing that?
Yeah. A lot.
I would rather die than answer a phone all day for somebody else's. I don't know how else to say that. I mean, I know it's sort of it sounds arrogant, but I mean,
That's
I
your
don't
truth. That's your truth. Like
this,
you've lived by it. It's not like you know what I mean?
yeah.
Somebody might take it in that way, but I think the reality is that's what you have lived. That is how you have shaped your life. And you have every right to do so. Because if you didn't, then how would we even have an example of what it can look like if your principles are the guiding force in the examination of all of this around us?
Well, that's right. That's right. If we lead at all, we lead by example, right? I do nobody
Yeah.
any service by not being authentic to how I manifest in the world. You know,
Yeah, you
um,
can say it, but if you're doing something different, then I'm like, he's full shit, for lack of a better term. It's like you're just saying it, but you live it. It's real for you. I want to speak on that though. I want to talk about American Moor if we can,
mm, mm,
because I feel like that level of authenticity, that decision of, okay, what I want to examine and what I want to talk about currently doesn't exist. So I'm going to make it. That to me is the difference. You decided to create something that didn't exist in the discourse about theater, about Shakespeare, and this idea of intersections between being a Black man, not just in theater and in television and in this industry, but in the world, in the United States, I'll say specifically, because this is a unique experience for a lot of us. Um, and you wanted to examine this through the lens of Othello, and you don't do it in you don't approach it from a commercial perspective.
No.
You don't
Well,
approach it from, I want to make a play that as many people as possible are going to come pay a ticket to see, and I want to sell lots of tickets, like Christmas Carol, right? A Christmas Carol, or I don't know, Guys and Dolls. Things are like, okay, we're
mhm.
gonna this is the one. This is gonna bring people in. It's a familiar piece. People are gonna feel good. They're gonna want to pay to see. No, you're saying I want to have a conversation with people. I want to spark discourse so that we can somehow use our critical thinking to get to the other side of something. You're not even prescribing what that other side is. You're saying we're going somewhere, and we're not doing it in 3 weeks. So can you talk about that? Can you talk about that process, and just can you tell me what it means to you?
Yeah. Well, I should probably preface that by saying all this that we've discussed in the last hour, had it been anything else, there wouldn't have been any American Moor, because it
Yeah.
is about
Yeah.
all those things. It is about having had those experiences, as difficult and trying with the trials and the triumphs all combined, in growing into life, into American life this way, you know, created that play. And the first draft was completed in 2012. I had come back from LA to New York in 2010 after 12 years in Los Angeles. That part of the journey, rife with all of the same things that we've been discussing, all the permutations of art for product, and who gets to make that, who doesn't, and why, you know, all of the socioeconomic issues that are all woven through that. And I came back thinking I was going to sort of be a stage actor again. And, New York certainly didn't rise to meet me. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody had been gone too long, and we are such a celebrity driven culture that it was very difficult to bring myself to anybody's attention. Many of the same problems applied. I'm reading for leading man roles, and I'm not Patrick Page. It's like somebody says, "Oh, you're doing Shakespeare? Got to get Patrick Page." Got to get you got to get John Douglas Thompson. You got to get we're
Yeah, there's a
right,
perception of
right,
who
right.
can
And
do
nobody knew
Shakespeare.
who I
Yeah.
was doing Shakespeare or anything else. But I was out there, and I had an audition for a regional theater production, a Syracuse stage production of Midsummer Night's Dream. And it was for the combined roles of Oberon and Theseus, which they combine more often than not now because they don't want to pay two actors. Right? There's been a lot of that. Again, there's the money piece, right? There's the marketing piece.
Interesting.
Uh,
So Oberon is
yeah,
King of the Fairies, right?
right,
But who is
right.
Theseus again? Can you refresh me?
Theseus is the Duke of Athens. Right?
Okay.
He is Oberon's counterpart in the real world.
Okay. Thank
Right,
you. Yes. Thank you.
right. So there's Theseus and Hippolyta, right? His captured wife,
Right.
and
Right.
Oberon and Titania,
In the
right,
dream world.
right. And so they combined the roles, and I had played those roles before, and I went in, and the director was a young man. He might have been 38, maybe, and I was what was at that time, what would I have been, 50 or so, right? So think about a 50-year-old's life in the theater, right? You get out of school in 87. Think about the knowledge and sensibility and insight that you amass, right?
Significant.
And I'm standing opposite this young man, and he's sitting on the other side of this table, and he has all the authority, right? Because that's what auditioning is. That's what's set up. And he says the material was severely redacted, right? Because in this process, they need to see, say, 40 people in a day, and they don't have time for everybody to read all of. So they redact it. They take all this stuff out, right?
Oh.
And so the scenes are short. And he says, so I need to see this and this and this and this and this and this in the scene, in the work that you do. And I looked at the material and I thought, well, all the places where Shakespeare was showing that, you've removed. So either you're stupid or you're asking me to do something that is impossible, right? Which either way, you are not going to see what would give you the best sense of who is right for these roles for you. Or you have a sense before going in of who's right for these roles, and you're just waiting for that person to walk in the room, right? That could be another thing. So these are scenes with Hippolyta and Titania, and they're romantic scenes. They're sexually fraught, and they have a reader who is a man of about 60. And I think so. I'm supposed to read with this. This is your reader. This is who you have. And I'm like, this process is so perverse. This thing that we do is so perverse, right?
Yeah.
And we call it making theater, and it is not. It is not, and it doesn't make good theater, right? And it's not for the purpose of making good theater. It's for other things, and I'm not even sure what they all are. But here I am, and I read the scenes, and there was never a conversation, right? About, well, what do you think, or what would you like, or what would you like to try, or anything. It was just kind of like, show me what I want to see. And then they said, can you go outside and wait? And I thought, okay, well, maybe, they want to call me back in, and I went outside in the hallway and I waited for a while, and a monitor came out and dismissed me eventually, said, yeah, that'll be it. And I went out into the street. And, again, you have to remember, I've been doing that for how many years? Since 1990, at least, 80, 87, 88. I was used to it. I was used to the draconian nature of auditioning, But for some reason, this day, this particular situation, it struck me. It struck me that how absurd is this? This person didn't want to talk to me. This person didn't want to know anything about me. This is so disrespectful. This is so wrong on so many levels. On the level of basic humanity, of understanding another human being standing in front of you, of seeing that person who's walked in to do this, of gleaning everything you can about what that person brings to the table. He's twice your age. And yet you are not able to see past your privilege and your position of authority to engage and understand and care and use what he's bringing into the room. You miss it completely. And I was a mess. I was like, this is what I've spent my life doing to be here. And somebody suggested that a colleague suggested I write it down. And I thought, I don't want to write anything down. I don't want to write a play. That's what actors do when they don't have anything else to do. Oh, I'll write something. I'll make I don't want to be that. I don't want to do that. I said, no, write this down. And I went home and I wrote something down in like an hour. And I showed it to that colleague, and they said, there's something vibrating here that's really important. Continue with this. And I did, and it grew quickly. And it grew into a first reading and then a first public performance. And in the first public performance, the reactions were deep and vociferous. And they came from all quarters. They came from genders and races and ages. And I was encouraged to continue to evolve it. And so I did that over the next 7 years, continuing to show this piece and bring in people to work on it and solicit various dramaturgical review. And my director, Kim Wield, who chairs the directing program, the John Wells Master's Directing Program at Carnegie Mellon University, began to work with me on this in around 2015, and brought her expertise and her support network to bear to the extent that it existed, and it went where it went. But I'm not sure that was your question. Your question was about the play itself and the process,
what it means to you.
I think it's the only piece of work in my body of work that is truly significant, and I think it is made significant by how it came into the world. That catalyst, which was just sort of cataclysmic, that moment, that one audition and that realization, this is where you are. This is who you are in the world and what you are, in the world. And I think the ancestors started talking.
Mm.
The ancestors started writing this play. I don't write this. American Moor is an extraordinary play, and I don't write that well. Right? And I don't say that about anything else in my body of work. It's not, nothing else is important, in the way that this play is what it is. And so I think the ancestors kind of did it, and I've seen that borne out in they are validated in what they said through me, in the way that people have picked up this play, this play. You have to understand that, Thembi, this is all so deep and intricate and weaves back on itself that it's hard to discuss it all in a forum like this, because, it goes on and on. But the fact of the matter is, I didn't have Black support. I didn't have support from the Black community in working on this play. I went to Black directors that I knew, who knew my work, and people, and said, hey, work with me on this. And none of them had the time of day for this. Important ones, running theaters, who knew who I was, didn't have the time of day. And that's because they had been raised in this same system, which is about, you're selling something, you're all chasing the same white dollar, right?
Yeah.
You don't have time for somebody who's not a celebrity, who's not going to connect you to your next state of advancement, your next money, your next thing.
Mm-hmm. Because you have to survive.
You're all looking for, if fucking Denzel came along to them with this play, yes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. They would
right?
do it.
But who are you? Why do I even have time to read this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? This isn't an August Wilson play. Why should I read it?
Yeah.
Somebody came to them with the long lost August Wilson play. This is the one that wasn't in the canon that nobody ever saw. They'll read that, right? They'll read that. It could be the biggest piece of shit in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They'll try to put that on stage.
That's a whole other conversation that I definitely want to have.
That's what I'm saying. This is the reprehensible nature of humanity, right? There is an element of humanity which is void of any real integrity, right? Because it will do things like that, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I went to my colleague Kim, who was a white woman who was at NYU with me as an actor, right? And she decided to go into directing, right? And I went off my acting world. And she said, after seeing this play on the Lower East Side, a little place, doing it with a little theater called Phoenix Theater Ensemble, she saw it and said, this is amazing. And I said, yeah, okay, you want to direct it? And she said, well, I really think you need a Black man to direct this. And I said, I've tried, I've asked, right? Nobody has even read it, And, if you have something that you want to bring, let's work. I'm here to do the work. And of course, bringing that into the equation is fraught with all kinds of stuff, because here's this white woman trying to understand clearly, trying to get past the privilege, right? In the way that the director in the play cannot.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But you continue to have this
but at a time though, Keith, when we weren't even really talking about privilege in the way that we're talking about it now. So that's an additional barrier that I think is important to acknowledge, that our public conversation is more nuanced in terms of understanding even what privilege is and talking about it commonly. At that point, that wasn't necessarily the case. It was just starting to, yeah. So I think that's worth acknowledging as well.
Yeah. And yet, whether we were talking about it or not, it was present, right? What I had with Kim was that she knew me from school. She had known me for a long time. We had had our interactions as people. She knew the human being better. She had a leg up, right? And yet she existed in privilege that I could never enjoy, right? And had to work to see beyond that. Had to continually either be reminded or remind herself. We're trying to talk across an idea is on the table. Said, well, I'm the director. I think it should be like this. I say, yeah, but I'm the guy. I live this. You have to trust that I know better than you in this situation.
Yeah.
So my thoughts about people in plays juxtaposed opposite people making the play, whatever it is. If we're to go, we can go back and talk about The Crucible.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about Shakespeare. We could talk about American Moor. We're talking about the same thing. You have human beings in the play. In order to make them as human as possible, we have to understand ourselves outside of the play. How are we coming to this with all our human condition, right? And behaving. Let's look at ourselves, because those are going to be the people, in the Untitled Othello project, I'm looking at 400-year-old depictions of human beings, but their humanity is no different than ours. It can't be. The human animal hasn't changed. It doesn't want other things. It hasn't sort of spiritually transcended into some other being. It's that. And we can see it in everything. We can see ourselves conspiring to create tragedy all day long in everything that we do, because we are human beings and we can't help it.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of deep irony that we navigate in making theater. I'm looking at the human being. I'm looking at the shows that post Summer of Racial Reckoning and We See You, White American Theater, et cetera, the shows that came to Broadway that were the Black shows, right?
Yeah.
And they're all shows where the Black trauma, the Black interaction is as if behind a glass, right?
Mm.
And the audience of privilege, right? Whiteness and privilege and money, those that could afford to come to the theater can sit outside that glass and look and watch that thing going on in there, but they don't have to interact with it. They can watch it and laugh, right?
Yeah.
Or say, "Oh yes, I get that trauma. I get what happened there, and yes, I'm aware," and go back to their lives. But then you show them American Moor, and here's this large, again, the character we were talking about showing up in the world, right, and walking through life and realizing how people recognize him, right? Here's this person with all his power and intellect and rage, right, saying, "You're going to deal with me." And there's no filter, right? There's no screen. There's no glass. And all of a sudden, they're all very uncomfortable. Much harder to do this play. And the only people whose hands you can put it in are white people. There's no structure of Blackness on that level. Or if it is, it's caught up in the same thing that everybody else is, which is, I'm going to do Black people in Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire, because I can sell that. I can sell Blair Underwood, right? In Tennessee Williams, right? But I can't sell this. I can't. I'm not a part of that, right?
Yeah.
You should be. That's exactly what you should be doing if you want something to change.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not you want to go to Cancun. That's what you want, right? You want to fix your house. You want a new car. You want
Yeah.
You want your servants and stuff just like everybody else, because you're a human being. Because you're a human being.
Mm.
And if there was anything that could teach us that Black people and white people, that race is not a thing, that human beings are human beings, it's that. Look at that. Everybody trying to do the same thing, which is just let me get from A to B with as little discomfort as I can.
Yeah.
Let me get from beginning to end, with little discomfort and have a good time, right? What can I sell, right? So American Moor doesn't really have a place in that. Where we ended up going was white institutions who only can see as much of that picture. They look at that play and they understand that there's value here. They can feel it vibrating, but only to a certain extent. And I'll tell you what, we were off Broadway and the producer, one of them, said to me before we opened, "Can you be less angry in that speech? Can you be less angry in that?" And I said, "Well, explain what is it?" Well, you don't want to, you have things to tell us in this play and you want us to hear them. So you don't want to turn your audience, because they'll not hear, they'll shut that, and you're kind of gobsmacked because here you are in the play, right? Opposite a person who has no idea, has no ability to hear themselves, to see themselves, oblivious to the fact that they are telling you to mitigate the authenticity of this story so that they won't be shocked or threatened. And you say, did you read this play? Do you hear yourself? Do you feel ashamed? Do you feel the absurdity? Do you see yourself saying what you're saying? Does it matter to you? And you walk forward from that, again, growing in your awareness that this is you in this America. Here you have written this play, right? Here you have written this amazing play that so many people have been moved by. You have watched them. You have watched writers write about it. You have watched its burgeoning life in academia. You have watched scholars in Shakespeare and critical race, early modern critical race theory, hold forth about this play, dedicate chapters in books to this play. And yet, what can we get Jeremy O. Harris to do? Right? What can we get him to do? Can we get him on, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. This is the framework that you're being forced to operate in. And yet you still find a way. You still find a way to move the conversation forward. And that I feel like it's worth the amount of time it takes to unpack these experiences. And then as you're unpacking them, more things are still happening. Life isn't stopping. More things are happening. And so you have to continue to fold in the new context as it develops, which requires a level of vulnerability and depth and openness that most of us don't have the luxury of exhibiting or don't have the resources to support on any ongoing basis. At least that's what we have come to believe about ourselves. I would argue that we make time for things that are important. The amount of social media scrolling that many of us do, if we just cut that in half, we probably could afford the time to explore these bigger questions of life, because certainly it wouldn't hurt for any of us who are chronically online, I include myself in that, to take some time away from something like that to devote to something so important as this. So I also think, to a certain extent, it's what do we even feel like we have the capacity to explore? And is it easier for me to sort of hide in a place of, I'm just trying to survive? And so I say that I'm wondering, because we still have other questions. I want to know, can we continue the conversation and do a part 2?
Sure, I'll see why not.
Okay. Because I had this thing in my mind. I was like, okay, I'm going to keep it in a certain time frame and I'm going to, but this can't be. I was doing what we were talking about the other day that we do, where we try to squeeze something into a time frame. The conversation is so important and needs to happen. And so I'm just hopeful that you'll let me take more of your time to talk about this again.
Yeah, of course.
Like to continue. Okay.
Of course.
Okay,
I mean, that's my very point, that, we do these things like, we're going to figure out, this issue on LGBTQ rights. So we're going to convene a meeting for like a day, right?
And then we're gonna have it all
okay,
out.
we did it. We had our day, so we're done.
Right.
And nothing, and we do that with everything, and it's because we've been taught to do it with everything, because time is money. Everything is a time is money equation, right? Nothing is.
It's hard to push against that. You see yourself doing it. You're like, wait a second, I'm doing it too. Okay.
Yeah. It's everything.
Yeah. Okay, good. Hey, Keybards, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my conversation with award-winning actor and playwright Keith Hamilton Cobb. Now is the perfect time to like, subscribe, follow, do whatever you need to do to make sure you get that notification as soon as part 2 drops. Till next time. Keybard is produced, directed, and hosted by Tembi Duncan. Theme music produced by Psycho Sid. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, follow, leave a review, or give us a 5-star rating. Your support helps the show reach more listeners, and it means the world to me. Thank you for listening.